Alright guys, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Amy Cawthorn. I'm the tuberculosis program manager here at the health district. I was voluntold that I was going to do this training, so here I am. If I kind of keel over, just kick me, I'll get back up. I don't like speaking in front of a lot of people, and then when you throw the video factor in, that's just like a whole nother level. But, you know, this last year, Galveston County Health District, along with Coastal Health and Wellness, faced, you know, some infection control issues. And so from that, we are trying to learn and go forward, and now they've implemented an annual bloodborne pathogen and infection control training. I'll try to keep it brief and do a lot of summarizing. You know, y'all's time is pretty valuable. So if you have any input, please feel free to add it. You know, these are PowerPoints. This is evidence-based research that we're going off of, but hands-on life skills and then information you already carry along in your back pocket are more than accepted. So a couple learning objectives. It's a lot of wordiness here. I'm going to skim through it and then summarize it. But your learning objectives are to understand the risks associated with bloodborne pathogens in the workplace, understand how to minimize risks and potential for exposure at work, determine proper action if an exposure occurs, and demonstrate skill of soiled glove removal. A lot of this stuff is probably basics for you guys. Again, I think this will be probably the easiest training you do in quite a while. A lot of it's common sense. But sifting through all these words, essentially it's beware while you're on the job. Look out for risks that can, you know, hurt you or harm you, and try to break those risks or break the chain of infection or potential chain infection. And then going forward, learn from those mistakes and essentially implement, you know, common sense and awareness every day in what you do. So why do we need this training? To provide care to an injured or ill person, which you guys do on the regular, but more importantly, to handle contaminated sharps, clean blood or body fluid spill, and learn what to do if you're exposed to bloodborne pathogens. So if you have any type of exposure, I've also printed off a packet to keep on hand if you'd like. If you do have an exposure, it gives step-by-step on what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Yeah, I think I printed them off last time we did the TB exposure.
So fun in the way you.
So you should know the risks of workplace duties. I think you guys are all very aware of the risks. You know, it's every day, every shift, every ride, there's a risk. And I'd like to think that you're aware more than anyone else that takes this class at Galveston County Health District. The routes of entry for bloodborne pathogens, and protective and preventative measures for handling blood or other bodily fluids. So what are bloodborne pathogens? So essentially they're disease-causing microorganisms that are present in human blood. There's a lot of them, but really we're going to focus on three. And the three most dangerous that we want to be aware of and be educated on. But they may be transmitted through exposure to the blood or certain bodily fluids of an infected person. And so of course they can, with the right circumstances, they can transmit diseases. So today we're going to talk about HIV, Hep B, and Hep C, or hepatitis B and hepatitis C. And then you'll hear the term OPIM, other potentially infectious materials besides blood, so human bodily fluids, you know, such as cerebrospinal fluid, pericardial fluid, synovial fluid, amniotic fluid. That's a big one, right? I mean, I'm sure that we see that. So, or any cell culture, fluid, tissue, organ containing any of the contaminants we're talking about, HIV, Hep C, Hep B, or any unfixed fresh tissue, like a good gaping wound. That's a good way to transmit. So, what essentially though, when I'm going to keep on touching base on common sense. If you treat all bodily fluids as if it's contaminated, you're already in a good spot. Things that don't carry bloodborne pathogen, urine, feces, saliva, so anyone, you know, peeing on you or throwing poop at you, no alarm needed for bloodborne pathogens. Alright, so transmission of bloodborne pathogens. How are they transmitted? So again, they're contaminated blood or bodily fluids enter the body of another person. So in the workplace setting, number one way that we're going to see that is accidental puncture. I don't know, it happens. It's happened to me. They actually had Hep C. We know it's good, thank goodness, but it happens. Mucous membranes and broken skin. So these are the most common. The accidental puncture is high risk. Broken skin, mucous membrane, that's medium. Again, the most common way of transmission is the needle stick or sexual contact, and we shouldn't have to worry about the latter, but the best defense is intact skin, right? So the bloodborne pathogens of concern that we're going to talk about, HIV, Hep B, and Hep C. And you guys, I try to be funny sometimes. You know, I might not smile when I'm funny. If you think it's funny, it's okay, laugh, makes me feel better.
I was told to behave, so
Oh, okay.
I have to.
That's understandable.
So HIV is what we're going to talk about first. Obviously, we all know it's human immunodeficiency virus. It can lead to AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So there's no cure for HIV or AIDS, but it can't reproduce outside of the body. So common modes of transmission, again, are unprotected sexual activity, sharing needles, syringes, being born to an infected mother. So really, that kind of takes most of us and most of you out of the most common mode of transmission or being infected that way. But less common, being stuck with an HIV-contaminated needle or other sharp object, like a piece of glass or, something they might have in their hand that's sharp that you're unaware of. Or blood transfusions. The blood transfusions is definitely less common for HIV, Hep B, and Hep C because they often do a screening now. Well, not often. They do a screening before they accept blood and then give blood to someone. So HIV is not spread through tears, sweat, feces, urine. So we're good there. Here we go. HIV is spread mostly through 4 body fluids: semen, vaginal fluid, blood. So blood is the one we're concerned about, and breast milk. Again, HIV is not spread through tears, sweat, feces, or urine. And this, they pop up. I have to do it like this. So these are the signs and symptoms, but you can go years without these signs or symptoms. But this is someone that, they're going to see these that are active, and usually it's turned into AIDS. So hepatitis. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with hepatitis. Essentially, it's an inflammation of the liver, can lead to cirrhosis or liver cancer. It's when the liver is inflamed or damaged, its function can be affected. So some of the things that causes heavy alcohol use, toxins, medications, or a lot of some medications. But it is caused by a virus. And in the United States, the Hep virus, the most common are Hep A, Hep B, and Hep C. So in this class, we're going to just talk about Hep B and Hep C. And most of the symptoms for all the hepatitis are very similar, but we'll go through them nonetheless. So first off, hepatitis C, modes of transmission. So sharing needles, syringes, rinse water, again, needle stick injuries in healthcare settings. That's a big one. It's most common. You have a lot of people around one body and arms are going and, chests are pumping. It's very easy to incur a needle stick injury. Being born to an infected mother, none of us, it's already done, so we don't have to worry about that. Less common, sharing personal care items, having sexual contact with an infected person, or getting a tattoo or body piercing in an unregulated setting. So no garage tattoos. And these are our symptoms. Again, I'm going to go through these quick. It can be many years, if not decades, before these symptoms come to surface. And again, a lot of the a lot of the hepatitis symptoms are the same. So there's 2 types of Hep B. That's Hep C. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Hep B. There's 2 types of Hep B. Acute and that's within the first 6 months of being exposed. And about 20% of the people can actually, their immune system can fight off Hep B. But acute's within the first 6 months, and chronic is from thereafter. It's a lifelong infection, can cause serious health problems, obviously liver damage, cirrhosis, liver cancer, and even death. So and actually, I'm sorry, that percentage was wrong. It's 90% or more develop immunity if being exposed to Hep B, and 10% become chronic. Infants and children are at the greatest risk. This is an important fact. Hep B can survive in dry blood for 7 days. It's kind of a big deal. Hopefully you all have your Hep B vaccine. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but I just kind of like to marinate on that. This is the only one that literally can survive in dry blood for 7 days. That puts us at a greater risk. So the modes of transmission, I'm just gonna, those are pretty much similar to the other viruses, unprotected sexual activity, sharing needles, being born to an infected mother. But for us, I'd like to focus on, medical equipment such as a glucose monitor. We think of a glucose monitor, or I do, as pretty, not invalid, but it doesn't present danger. It's a glucose monitor. But definitely, if you have dry blood on there, it's good for, you can get infected for up to 7 days. So, and then direct contact with blood or open spores of an infected person. And then once again, exposure to blood from a needle stick. Those darn needle sticks.
You forgot to add paramedics to steal their basic partner's pen.
Say it again?
Paramedics to steal their basic partner's pen.
Oh, okay, their pen.
Everybody here after they steal pens.
And then a lot of the same symptoms as Hep C. And again, this can take years, if not decades, to manifest. So Hep B prevention, we're all, the job category is risk category A, which means that you are at highest risk. And then we have category B and C. It's not actually definitely category A. So the great thing about Hep B is there's the Hep B vaccine. And it's given in 3 doses over 6 months. It's 80 to 95% effective. And those are some pretty substantial numbers. So this is just some fun facts. What's in it for me as far as the Hep B vaccine? Obviously, prevention of infection is number one. So the risk of adverse events for those that are like anti-vaccine, after vaccination, it's only 1 in 1.1 million that you would get Hep B from the vaccine. So here's some other pretty cool odds. So the odds of drowning while taking a bath are greater. Odds of flesh-eating bacteria infection, that's, a little less, or greater. Sorry, greater. And then odds of being mauled to death by a dog. Odds of becoming a movie star. I thought this one was kind of wild. Odds of dating a supermodel, 1 in 88,000. I know. Who would have thought?
That seems a little off.
Yeah.
That's an off for you.
You can date a hand
Yeah.
model.
And then odds of getting a role. So,
Those remind me of
the
Seinfeld.
vaccine, in short, get the
George
vaccine.
in the hand model.
So methods of implementation and control, universal precautions. We assume that all bodily fluids, all blood, they're contaminated, and that'll keep you safe with that thought process. We have engineering controls, like retracting sharps, needleless systems, and then this work practice control. Some of this, it doesn't pertain to us, but personal health, cover wounds, stay at home if ill. I don't know, they say that, but get immunized. So we go back to the Hep B vaccine. And then regulated waste products, double bag, store upright, puncture resistant, use your red bags, your biohazard equipment to dispose of sharps and any contaminated objects. Don't bend the needles, no recapping. Use the one-handed scoop. I'm sure you guys all know what the one-handed scoop is. Scoop and click it down. And again, a lot of what they ask of us is in an ideal environment, and none of you guys work in an ideal environment. If anything, you work in quite the opposite. So what it boils down to, I think, for EMS is being aware and being cognizant of what you're doing, when you're doing it, what you're handling, and using common sense. I'm going to go down to contaminated equipment. So again, go use your biohazard bags, labels, sharp containers, things like that. Be aware of your isolation precautions. Airborne, when we've had the TB class here before, N95 on you, surgical mask on them. If you don't have that, put a surgical mask on them. Treat everybody as if they have it. And if you are exposed, CDC states that you need typically to go from disease to infection on tuberculosis, you're around that person, 8 hours a day, a few days in a row. So in the back of a rig going to the ER, you're probably all right, but you always want to follow up like your pamphlets say on exposure. Use PPE. So I had emailed Amy. I said, hey, you guys use PPE? And she's like, well, it depends if we're going, do we know what we're going into? Do we know what we're dealing with? So again, in an ideal world, you're gonna, use your PPE. Ideal situation. And again, this is kind of redundant, but it's going back to sharps disposal containers, use needleless injection systems when you can, self-sheathing needles, things like that. And I think, here we go. So the elements of a legitimized exposure control plan, sharps management, spill cleanup, regulated waste, and we'll scoot down to, of course, hygiene. That's a big one. And then remember, intact skin is your best defense. Vaccination. And then post-exposure follow-up and treatment. You guys now have a packet in front of you. We'll go through it on here. If you're exposed, what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Here's our PPE. I'm not going to go through this. But again, in an ideal situation, an ideal world, we'll have ourselves completely covered. So this symbol should be placed on all containers that are contaminated blood or OPIMs. We have the red bags or red containers. I'm sure that you guys do too for biohazard materials. It comes pre-printed on most sharps containers. So an exposure incident plan, if you have an exposure incident to blood or OPIM, immediately do the following. So wash the needle stick, because again, that's the most common, right, is a needle stick, because that we're dealing with. Then again, you could see some off-the-wall exposures. But wash the needle stick, cut skin with soap and water. Flush it with water, splashes to the nose and mouth. Irrigate the eyes with clean water or saline. And when it's said and done, you report the exposure to your supervisor and the risk and safety coordinator. And you don't need to write this down, remember it, because it's on the packet that was given to you. So our responsibility at GCHD is to provide immediate post-exposure medical eval and follow-up to the exposed employees. No cost, it's confidential. We test for Hep B, Hep C, and HIV. You can do that anyway. We have our STD program, so you can, even without an exposure, get tested. And then preventative treatment when indicated. So there are prophylaxis for some exposures, and some there's no need. You just need to test and go from there. And then test the blood of the source person. So that information needs to be given to GCHD also, so they can test them. So after hours, this is our post-exposure incident plan. Again, it's on the paperwork that I gave you guys. But notify your supervisor immediately, and on the next business day, notify your risk and safety coordinator. And then, again, it's make informed decisions about seeking care for yourself. You have good judgment skills. If you feel like you need to go to urgent care, ER, then go. And again, this is a continuation of the post-exposure incident plan, and it's on your paperwork there. It's also on the employee extranet. That's what it looks like. So you just log in, goes up to safety and emergency information, and it's in there. And again, this is a bit redundant. It just gives more in detail what you need to do, but you do need to know that the risk and safety coordinator needs to be contacted within 24 hours of exposure. And then the last one, notarized statements. So employees who sustain an exposure are required to complete a notarized statement outlining the details of the exposure within 10 calendar days. Once you notify your supervisor, they're going to help you walk through this and help you remember what you need to do. But within 10 calendar days. The notarized statement, along with the employee report of injury, which is another form that needs to be filled out, is faxed to risk and safety coordinator, or you can always walk it down there. She's in the same building. Any questions? Well, that's it. That's all I have. Thank you guys for having me.
Should be a good thing.
That's it.